Wonderful. Take your Bibles and go with us to the book of James. We're going to be in James chapter 3, verse 13. And as you're turning there, I want to give us the chance to review what we learned last week and 2 weeks before that. Tony Neal taught in my stead, and then I came back and really taught the same passage, and I appreciate Tony doing that. And we're talking about taming the tongue. And we're in the latter parts of that now, but I want to review. We've talked about the fact that teachers are going to be judged more strictly. James clearly offers that as a warning to those who believe that getting up and using the tongue in that capacity is a desirable thing. I think he warns them to be careful and be prepared and ready. We also learned that the tongue is the most destructive part of the human body. And I don't think anybody in the room argues that point. We know that. We know that we've been attacked with the tongue. We know that we probably have done damage with our very own tongue. So that makes sense. We learned that the tongue is small but strong. 3 examples of that. Do you remember any of those? It's strong like a horse's bit, right? It's strong like a rudder on a boat, and it's strong like a spark, right? Can start an entire forest fire, and or a brush fire. So that was great illustrations by James. We also learned this. I think this is powerful. The tongue can be set on fire by hell or heaven. We're talking about how wicked the tongue is, but I think it's important for us to remember Pentecost, that the tongue can also be set on fire for the glory of God. And when we share Christ, when we're a witness for Him, when we encourage others, when we share the gospel story, our tongues are set on fire by heaven. And that's a powerful thing. And that really lends itself to what he said at the very end. The tongue is either good or bad. And, we told that story about a man being sent out to buy something good and bad, and he came back with tongue both times. And we learned that Michelle has tongue in her house, and she actually eats it. So, just kidding, Michelle. I know, it was a shock to me. No, I would not eat that, but I'm glad you do. All right, now I want to hang on just for one last second into verses 1 through 12 before we move on. And I want to go with something that I found. Warren Wiersbe wrote a great commentary that was given to me by my childhood pastor. We called him Brother Gene. Gene Stevens was his name. And he was a pastor at our church growing up for many, many years. And he was the only pastor I knew as a child. Like many people knew BF, that's the way Brother Gene was to the people of our church. And he gave me a commentary that I still have, still enjoy. And it said in there at the end of this passage, 12 words that can transform your life. And I thought I would just share these. Are you ready? Hold your hands up and we'll just count together, all right? The first word is please. All right, the second 2 words are thank you. Okay, that gets us to 3 words, right? Please and thank you. Some of the most important words. We teach our children to say that from the very beginning, right? Say please, say thank you, because it treats people not as objects, but as special human beings, right? The next 2 words, I'm sorry, are 2 more of the most powerful words you can ever offer. Have you ever had to say I'm sorry? Couple of bazillion times in your life, right? I'm sorry builds bridges and breaks down walls, right? There's no doubt about it. Next, I love you. Powerful words. Am I still on track? What are we up to? 8. We're up to 8, okay. All right, so very good. It's hard to count, Michelle. I love you, and we know how important that is to share. Christ, the most powerful words he ever shared, God shared with us, is through his Son. I love you. And then finally, I'm praying for you. And so I think Warren Wiersbe's right. Please, thank you, I'm sorry, I love you, I'm praying for you. I was told a long time, when you talk to God about people, you can talk to people about God. And I think that's what I'm praying for you really says. When you talk to God about people, you can talk to people about God. And so if you have somebody you're trying to share Christ with, pray for them. Pray for that opportunity, because when you talk to God about them, you'll have a chance to talk to them about God. I think that's a wonderful thing. All right, that being said, it's time for us to read the entire passage, because I want us to read it in context. Because if you'll look in your Bible, in James chapter 3, we go the first 12 verses, and in my NIV it says what? Taming the tongue. That's the headline over the passage. And then in verse 13, what's your Bible say? Two kinds of wisdom. And so our wonderful redactors and editors of the text have sometimes, I think, done us a disservice. A lot of times they help us. And you understand that all these titles are not in the original text, okay? This is for our help and our own guidance. Sometimes I'm afraid they subdivide the text incorrectly. And this is one of those times because I think it makes us think that now we're talking about something new. And I'm not so sure that we are talking about something new, and I'll explain in a moment. So let's read it in context, all 18 verses. Here we go. Not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We just learned that. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey, as we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they're steered by very small rudders wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. So, do you believe that it's two topics, or could it be the continuation of one? I'm going to propose tonight that it's a continuation of one. You see, we might get the impression that James is venturing off into a new part of the stream. But here's my point. A person's words and wisdom have direct relationship, right? A person's words and wisdom have direct relationship. You see, the wisdom in the mind determines the words of the mouth. The wisdom of the heart determines what somebody says. And so I think James is setting this up. Hey, if you will take care of the heart, of the source. We were watching this show the other night on Netflix. They have all these great series about parts of the United States, and this entire series was on Yellowstone National Park. How many of you have been to Yellowstone? It is an incredible highlight. If you have not been there, you've got to get there. It's amazing. And I know it's a volcano and it's scary and all that, but you really ought to try to go. And what it was talking about was the source of all these geysers and how that pressure is built up with the magma so close to the surface. And I think the same thing here, that a person's wisdom of the heart, I mean, that's where the heat of positive words builds. And what a person says is built and rooted in that source of wisdom. And so what I want to do is talk about basically, let's start with verse 13, okay? Verse 13, chapter 3, let's read it again. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. Now, what are the two most important words in the whole verse? Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. I think the two most important words are wise and understanding. Okay? You ever known a wise guy? We're not talking about that tonight, are we? We're talking about somebody who holds wisdom. The word wise points to deep discernment of the underlying principles of life. How many of you have known someone who was wise? One of the great privileges of being in the church is I think we're exposed to wisdom and wise people. There are people in our church right now that are sources of wisdom for me. I would imagine the same is true for you. The term understanding on the other side, so wise points to deep discernment of the riches and principles of life. Understanding relates to the practical daily application of those great guiding principles. Okay? So wisdom is understanding, discerning, right? And then the understanding relates to the practical daily application. So taken together, those two words are equivalent of theoretical, right, and then practical wisdom. If you're just theoretically wise, then you're not going to be what the Lord wants you to be. You have to be practically wise. You have to live that out, and James is talking about that over and over again. So here's my paraphrase. I've been doing this with us in these verses. I'm trying to get an understanding of what it actually says. And so here's my paraphrase tonight. Whomever among you really has the big picture and really knows how to get things done, that person will do good things in a humble way. Why? Because they're wise. You see how it goes together? Whomever among you has the big picture and knows how to get things done, that person will do good things in a humble way because they're wise. Question: who's the wisest person you've ever known? Who's the wisest person that you've ever known? Anybody want to answer?
My grandfather.
Okay, my grandfather.
He couldn't read or write.
Okay, very good. But wisdom, different than education, right? Anybody else? Okay. Let me share this story. I'm just gonna read it as it was written. The wisest man I've ever known was not an educated man. A semi-retired rancher, he had been a mortician, a professional boxer, a cattle truck driver, and a hotel pastry cook. Try to fit that all into one life, right? He had served as a Baptist deacon. In his 80s, he had served for years as deacon chairman in a small, semi-rural Texas Baptist church. Yet, due to a lake development project, the community of the church suddenly had exploded with newcomers. As the church grappled with more changes than it had seen in its century of existence, the wise old deacon demonstrated divine wisdom. In financial, physical, and fellowship decisions, he literally held the church together by his gentle wisdom. The primary mark of that wisdom was a humble gentleness when he spoke to the church. Such men and women produce the aura of God's presence. As I was reading that, and that was written by someone else, I was thinking, wow, I've known people just like that. Maybe not the job, the job listing on their resume, but gentle men, wise women who had an aura of God's presence around them. I think that is exactly what James is talking about. Now, James gets into this passage by talking about two things, though. He talks about worldly wisdom, and he talks about divine wisdom. Because there's two different kinds, right? And that's what I want us to kind of hit on here for a minute. We'll get back into verse 14 through 16 in a minute, but I just kind of want to plot off into this if we can. The world, let's talk about worldly wisdom first. The world operates by worldly wisdom, doesn't it? It operates by its own wisdom. When you get out into the world, you discover there's a whole new set of rules, what people deem as important, presuppositions, ideas, guiding principles of life. That's worldly wisdom. And that wisdom is exemplified by what? The movers and the shakers that shape the world, and the national policy, community policy, committee policy, whatever it is. But here's the bad news. Unfortunately, That worldly wisdom that we all swim in, that water that we swim in all the time, guess what? That worldly wisdom can spill over into the church. And all of a sudden you're thinking, as a believer, like the world thinks. And you're trying to operate the church the way the world operates. And James gives us, I think, this is about the best I think we can do. He gives us a snapshot, okay? Gives us a snapshot of worldly wisdom. Let's see if we recognize it, all right? Worldly wisdom demonstrates first bitter jealousy. You ever seen that in the world? They say in business that it's a dog-eat-dog world, right? It's exemplified by bitter jealousy. Nothing open, nothing conciliatory, nothing redemptive taking place in a worldly wisdom pool, if you will. Okay? Add to that the second worst thing, maybe the worst thing, selfish ambition. Bitter jealousy, selfish ambition. If it is to be, it is up to me. And I'll step on whoever I have to step on to get to the top, right? We've heard those ideas. We've seen them, we've felt them, we've lived them. They happen all over the world, right? Rivalry happens in this pool. Maliciousness, pettiness. A lot of people, when they come and they get a job here at the church, they say things like, it's just so different here than it is in the other places I've worked, right? Because you're not supposed to have that here, right? This attitude of pettiness and maliciousness, rivalry, you can think about Corinth, because that same idea had trickled in there. There was too much of Corinth in the church and not enough church in Corinth a lot of the times, and that's why Paul's writing to them so harshly, because it divided the church into factions. You ever been in a church that was being divided into factions? Yeah, it's scary, it's frustrating, it's sad, it's heartbreaking. It happens. Worldly wisdom also. Here's three words that James uses. Earthly, unspiritual, and devilish. Wow, right? Let me say them again. Earthly, unspiritual, and devilish. So let's think about terms we might use. Cutthroat tactics, right? Animalistic, demonic. We should use that word. Chaos producing, right? The wisdom of the world produces this selfish ambition. How many of y'all read biographies? Do you like to read biographies? One of the things that I was counseled in by a mentor of mine, Brian Harbour, years ago, he said, Danny, you really ought to read as many biographies as you possibly can. And so it's been fun to read biographies of Sam Walton and Tom Landry and people like that. But I've also tried to read other biographies. And one of them that I read that really was inspiring, intriguing, not inspiring, it was frightening is what it was, Mussolini. Benito Mussolini. Have you ever read his biography? There's a scene that the biographer describes in his life. The biographer it exemplifies this idea. The biographer is interviewing him, and he's pacing the room, right? And the biographer asks him, what's your greatest ambition in life? And he says, I'm obsessed by one wild desire. It consumes my whole being. I want to make a mark in my era with my will. He says, I want to make a mark like this. He takes his fingers, all 5 fingers, right? And he scratches across a chair back from end to end, like the claw of a lion. So I want you to hear it again while he's scratching. I am obsessed by one wild desire. It consumes my whole being. I want to make a mark in my area with my will. Worldly wisdom, right? He did make a mark, a horrific mark, right, along with others. So there's 2 types of wisdom. One of the commentaries I have is the Life Application Bible Commentary. Probably scholars at the seminary wouldn't find this very helpful, but I really have over the years thought it was wonderful. It says this. Wisdom from below is characterized by bitter envy, selfish ambition, we said that, boasting, denying the truth, being earthly minded, being unspiritual, being from the devil, and it results in two things: disorder and evil practices and actions. Okay? So that's the first side of this thing. So the question is, has worldly wisdom leaked into me and you? And can we identify it? And can we root it out? Okay, so let me say again. You say, how do I know? Well, listen to the list. It's characterized by bitter envy, selfish ambition, boasting, denying the truth, being earthly minded, unspiritual, and from the devil. And it results in disorder and evil actions. Okay? So there's self-examination to be done here. Do we have a source? If we say my tongue's a problem, then we have to go back into the well, right? We have to swim upstream. Talked about that Sunday morning. We have to go upstream and see what's there. And so we got to figure out if it's a matter of the heart. All right? So we have worldly wisdom. So what's the other side? Divine wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay?
I'm going to interrupt you. I hate to do that.
That's fine.
You mentioned about how we feel about stuff. I read this last night. 2 Peter says, if you rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day by day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Which is exactly what you're saying. Is, have we become callous to that? Have we just kind of go, yes, whatever.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I was going,
Yeah. Yeah, it has to continue to be troubling, right? It has to be disturbing to our soul. And then we have to not become, arrogant in that, but we have to be burdened for it, right? So worldly wisdom. Thank you, Scott. Divine wisdom. Okay. Now, divine wisdom acts totally different, doesn't it? We just have a description of worldly wisdom, but divine wisdom. And divine wisdom, the first word that James uses in verse number 17 is pure. I love that. Everything we just said, it's nasty, filthy, polluted. And all of a sudden you get to divine wisdom, and purity is the first identifier. In motive it's pure, in word it's pure, in deed it's pure, in attitude it's pure. God's wisdom works in purity. And I think that's exciting to hear. Here's some other words we can lay on it. Unmixed, unlaced by anything false, not tainted, right? No hidden agendas. Everything's brought into the light of day. When you're operating in worldly wisdom, there's always a scheme about, right? Trying to finagle and work our way, figure it out, okay? But this way, no hidden agendas. I kind of see James' description right here, if you want to look at it, in verses 17, 18, and 19, kind of like the way the droplets of water break down white light into colors. They produce the rainbow, because he just lays out, he breaks the wisdom down into its colors. And here's the colors. Peace, okay? Courtesy, gentleness, grace, openness to reason, right? So all those things are in there. I think it's a wonderful list. I just use words that aren't in the NIV. But let's go back to our commentary. So we have divine worldly wisdom. We listed all those things, but now wisdom from heaven. The first was wisdom from below, now wisdom from heaven. It's characterized by purity, personal transparency or holiness. It's characterized by a peaceable spirit, willing to sacrifice for peace. It's characterized by being considerate, gentle, not seeking its own way. It's characterized by willingness to yield, agreeable, willing to reevaluate, open. It's characterized by being merciful, compassionate. It's characterized by being impartial, single-minded toward God and people. Characterized by sincerity, no hypocrisy. And what's it result in? Good fruit and good actions. Right? Good fruit and good actions. Here's something else just to lay out there before we start to bring this to a close. Human wisdom changes with every generation. Right? We can look right now at some things happening in the American society that we say how human wisdom has changed. It's not the same in 2020 as it was in a previous generation, but God's wisdom always remains the same, right? That's one of the great hopes that I have for sharing the gospel. People need a solid foundation. They need an anchor in this society. It's like swimming around in a jacuzzi. It's not going anywhere. It's just a frothy mess. And I think the church provides us, with a stream and a river. We're coming from somewhere and we're going somewhere, and we know exactly where that is. So I think that's positive. All right, so let's summarize. We've got 18 verses to summarize. Okay, let's go to page 83 in this commentary, because I want to go back here and pick this up. All right, we're gonna put all this together in one big kind of conjoined list. Okay, here's an overview. First, count your blessings. If you want to keep your spirit and your speech under control, count your blessings. By focusing on the positive, you're going to take away anger and bitterness. Okay, I think that's a great rule for us. Count your many blessings, name them. One by one. All right, and it will surprise you. There you go. All right, so count your blessings. Second, get in touch with the love of God. The commentator says, as we allow God to satisfy our spiritual needs, we'll have less of a need to strike out at others. I think that's a great word. Get in touch with the love of God. Be a conduit of that. Third, write your thoughts out in a letter rather than lashing out. Do you know Abraham Lincoln's principle? Have you ever heard this? That he would write a letter, throw it away, write another letter when he was angry, throw it away, write another letter, throw it away. And he said typically he would send the fifth or the sixth version of the letter, because by then he'd gotten all that anger out of his system, and then he wrote something that was helpful.
Don't leave it away, sir.
Yeah, don't leave it laying around. Shred it. In today's terms, shred it, right? Okay. Next, bring your speech under control by waiting before responding. The classic taking a time out is not just for kids, right? If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That is so hard. That's so easy to say as a parent, but that is just terribly hard, isn't it? Terribly hard. Wait before responding. Make 5 positive comments in your life to every negative one. Try that for a day. Make 5 positive comments to every negative one. Last, bring your speech under God's control by treating everything you say as a gift to the other person. It's powerful, right? What I'm about to say to you is going to be a gift to you. Change the way you think, right? Change what you say. All right, so now we're going to conjoin that list with this next one. Lessons for life from James. Decide to tame your tongue for a definite period of time. Okay? I'm not saying I'm going to hold my tongue for the next 12 hours so I can let it fly for the next 6 days. Okay? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you have to train yourself in this capacity. It's just like me working out. I can't show up in the weight room and just go gangbusters on day one. Number one, I'm going to hurt myself. It's going to be a mess. So habits take time, and habits build what? Character. And so we have to take our actions a step at a time. This is basically saying I'm going to make a conscious choice, just like I'm going to eat right for the next 12 hours. I know I can make it for 12 hours, right? It's also saying I'm going to put a guard on my tongue for the next 12 hours. And I'm literally going to think about it all day long. What comes out of my mouth, I'm going to say, Lord, let this be pleasing to you. And hour by hour, I trace it, I track it. I may even journal some things about it. But I literally take it as a snippet. I think it's a great lesson for us. And then you say, okay, I've made it for the last hour. Now I'm going to try additional hours. And I'm going to try half them and make it to lunch without saying something rude and ugly, right? And I'm going to make it a whole day, and I'm going to try to make it. And so that's how we develop habits in our life. I think it's a great thing. The next one. Measure your response in tense situations. In other words, you have to ask, do my words display wisdom of the world or wisdom of the Lord? And do I demonstrate peacemaking or do I demonstrate fostering division? Any of us can do both with this, right? So that's a lesson that we've learned from James. Last, say the tough questions to the end. Are you reconciled with everybody in your circle? Are you reconciled with everyone in your circle? Does a grudge exist that hasn't been settled? Are you exhibiting, right, the wisdom that God gave you? So I really think Scott said it best in that of all these chapters, this one probably is most self-analytically difficult. It's hard. It's hard for us to look and say, Lord, I'm really struggling here and I'm failing. And so I would just ask us, we can start a brush fire of goodness out of this room. I'm always reminded about that, There's no doubt I always want to speak to more and more people. I always want to see new people brought in. But what God does here in this room can impact our church and really our witness and our ministry. We can really impact others. So I want to encourage us to be a people here that say, Lord, I'm going to take this seriously, and I'm going to really be careful to guard my tongue over the next half day, week, life, and just go from there. I hope we can do that. I know we can. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Okay, let's pray together.